Rightio, how do I make whipped soap base? And let me apologise beforehand that this part of the video is going to be more talk than screen action. Well, there are loads of different ingredients that can be used to make a whipped soap base. You can make an all-natural whipped soap from hot processed soap paste or even from soap scraps. I've tried that a couple of times, but I don't like it. You're more likely to find whipped soaps made from cinder ingredients. Cinder is just short for synthetic detergents, and by that we mean things like SCI, SLSA, cocamide propyl betaine, all of which I'll be using in this particular whipped soap base. Because I never shy away from a challenge, I invented this whipped soap base as a way to use those tricksy SCI noodles in something other than solid shampoo. SCI noodles are difficult but not impossible, as I showed in a previous video, to melt down, which makes them less versatile than SCI powder. And because of the method I use to de-noodle the noodles, well, that's why this soap base is mousse-like instead of solid when it's cold, solid and firm. That doesn't matter. What matters is that it works, and it works well. There's no hard and fast rules about whipped soap bases. Anyways, let's crack on. Here I've got 80 grams of distilled water, and to that I'm adding 120 grams of SCI noodles. I'm going in on high power with my blender, and you're going to see this foam up. The noodles will break up, though not completely, but this is going to make it easier to melt them later. So to my foamy mixture I'm adding 80 grams of cocamide propyl betaine, 80 grams of glycerin and 8 grams of SLSA powder. Then I'm going to mix all those up by hand and put the jug into a double boiler to heat through and get the last little bits of SCI noodles melted down, or at least softened so they blend readily. There on the stove I'm weighing out 20 grams of stearic acid and just 12 grams of hemp seed oil into my little jug. Then I'm putting that in a double boiler to gently melt down. I'm using 2 separate pans, but if you've got a pan that's big enough to take 2 jugs, go for it. I keep checking to see if there are any obvious bits of solid noodles, and when I don't see any, it's time. So once my water-based and oil-based ingredients have heated up and melted down, I add the oils to the creamy surfactant mixture. The stearic acid acts almost like an emulsifier, so I blend this so everything is really well combined and emulsified. Once I've done that, I leave it to cool down to a temperature where I can add my preservative. We need a preservative in this because it contains water. I use a broad spectrum preservative and add 4 grams, that's 1% of my total formula. And that's it, voila! I'll be using this in a couple of hours, so I'm just going to cover the bowl and leave it in the pantry. If I wanted to store it for longer and use it at a later date, I'd transfer this to a sterilised airtight container and keep it somewhere cool. I've weighed out 100 grams of my cold whipped soap base, and you might not be able to tell on camera, but this texture is more mousse-like. The dessert, not the huge beast of a deer with insanely enormous antlers. I don't have a stand mixer, and this is only a small quantity, so I'm just using a hand mixer. I'm loosening it up a bit to get it creamy. Next, I'm going to add in 5 grams of kaolin clay, because I love it, and 100 grams of white granulated sugar, so an equal amount of sugar as soap base, and get those well combined. Once I'm happy everything is nicely mixed, I'm adding 3 grams of my favourite carrier oil, watermelon seed oil, my fragrance oil and some dusky pink mica. This fragrance I'm using is called Very Cherry, and it so is. It smells very strong and like a kind of cherry sherbet, if there is such a thing. It smells incredibly edible, and it's all I can do to restrain myself from dipping my finger in and licking it. It looks and smells like an extravagant cake topping. My daughter's boyfriend loves this fragrance, so this whipped soap is heading your way, Lukester. More whisking and just a bit more pink. I'm going to attempt to pipe this. Now, I'm absolutely rubbish at piping, as you might already have seen, and to be honest, because I don't sell this, I usually just bang it in the jar unceremoniously. I'm only piping it to show you guys that it can be piped, and for you to get an idea of the texture and consistency. Let's face it, this piping looks like a giant pink worm cast. That's worm poo, if you don't know what a worm cast is. I can't tell you how many times I've recorded myself making whipped soap and then deleted the vid because I'm so ashamed of my atrocious piping. But I decided it's time to take any criticism on the chin, and you're just going to have to live with it and forgive me for being cack-handed. I'm sure you'll do a great job of it, even if I can't. There you go. I hope you can see, as I wave it around in front of the camera, that it's light and airy and it keeps its shape. Anyway, let's test it using some of the scrapings from the bowl. Fabulous. It feels really luxurious and so velvety, and it leaves my skin all silky and moisturised, it really does. So that's the whipped soap sugar scrub. Right, whipped shaving soap for chaps, for their hairy faces. I suppose you can use it to shave anywhere. Well, maybe not regions located in the southern hemisphere of the human body, but anywhere else. Okay, I've weighed out 130 grams of my own recipe whipped soap base, and I'm loosening it up with a hand mixer to get it nice and creamy. Because I want this shave soap to be quite moisturising, I'm including more glycerin, just 2 grams. Glycerin's a humectant that draws moisture to itself, so it's a fantastic additive here. But I don't want to overdo it or the soap might feel too sticky. Get that mixed in. For this, I want to add extra non-comedogenic carrier oil. That means an oil that won't encourage blackheads. There's already some hemp oil in the base, and that's non-comedogenic, but I'm also going to put in some grapeseed oil. Grapeseed oil has a nice light feel on the skin. I've added 8 grams. When it comes to shaving, we want the razor to glide over the skin smoothly and lightly to avoid inflicting skin damage. This is one reason I've added extra oil and why I'm adding bentonite and kaolin, 13 grams of each. Both bentonite and clay will add some slip. They also help soak up toxins, particularly bentonite, so the idea is that it might help reduce the chance of any infection should you get a little nick. I'm stirring them in first so they don't puff out when I go in with the mixer. This looks a bit dry now, but as I mix it, it'll get nice and creamy again. I hear that with some whipped soap, if you overmix, they can kind of collapse down again later, but with this base, I've never had a problem with deflating soap, no matter how much I seem to mix it. I'm using essential oils to fragrance this shaving soap. Again, because these have antibacterial properties, amongst others, this might, and I say might because I'm avoiding making any medical claims, it might reduce the chance of any infection occurring from any breaks in the skin. I'm using 1 gram each of grapefruit, tea tree, rosemary and lavender essential oils. I'm making this shaving soap with the male in mind, and I'm generalising here, the male, in my experience, doesn't feel that fancy presentation adds any value, so as far as he's concerned, I can just slop it into the jar and job done. However, because I'm amused by my own disappointing piping, I'm going to go ahead and pipe it. This is the last time, I promise. That troller there, that's not too bad. Might have gone a bit overboard on the height. I feel like I should drizzle it with strawberry sauce and stick a flake in it. Okie dokes, let's get this tested. Well, I suppose you can smooth it on like this and that works fine. Still, I want to show you it with a shaving brush, so let's have a look. Put some soap in my hand, dip the brush in, wiggle it around, rub it around. I hope I'm doing this right. Lather it up with a brush. Bingo! Okie dokes, let's make some whipped soap salt scrub. This is pretty much going to be along the same lines as sugar scrub, but with a few minor differences. So I've measured out 100 grams of my whipped soap base and I'm loosening it up with the hand mixer. This time I'm adding 15 grams of kaolin clay powder and 4 grams of rice bran oil. I should have mixed it in a bit by hand before going in with the power tool so it didn't all puff out, but I didn't, did I? Okay, I'm putting in 4 grams of fragrance oil mixed with 2 grams of polysorbate 80. The reason I'm using polysorbate 80 is because of the dye I'm using to colour this. I just want to make sure it doesn't stain the bath or shower. And then in goes 50 grams of Himalayan pink salt. I would have preferred to use sea salt, but I've only got coarse sea salt in at the moment, so Himalayan it is. I'm going to get that whisked in. Lastly, I'm putting in this bold, vibrant sapphire blue dye. I should have showed you how I prepare this really, but I'd already done it before I even thought about switching the camera on. Anyway, these water-soluble dyes are really powerful, and you only need a merest pinch of dye powder to get this depth of colour. I bloom the dye first by mixing the little pinch with a little water and then let it sit for a while so all the granules disperse and dissolve before I use it. Okay, so whisk, 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 whisk to get that dye blended in, and it's time for me to offend your eyes with my piping again. I've just got 2 little repurposed tubs this time. This makes it easy for sure. In case you're wondering what the towel's about, I put this down, dampen it a bit first to stop the bowls and pots and stuff from sliding around on the tiles. I expect I could get a rubber mat or something for the same purpose, but I'm old school. Wave that around a bit so you can see what it looks like, and then I'm going to test it. I must confess that I love salt soap, so I personally prefer this salt scrub to the sugar scrub, but that's just me. This is lovely, and all that kaolin makes it feel so velvety, and it leaves my skin feeling really clean but silky and moisturised.